For the next 6 weeks, we're going to walk through a book in the Bible that's entitled Ecclesiastes. Now, that is a long word, which actually is from a Greek word that means preacher. And the book of Ecclesiastes is written by a preacher, a teacher by the name of Solomon, who lived a full life. Solomon was seen as a man of great wisdom, a man of great affluence. He was a king. But at the end of his life, he began to reflect back on his life. And that's why we've entitled this teaching series, The Truth About Life. Do you ever wonder, what's the point to all this? I get up in the morning, I go to work, I pay the bills, I drive my kids to recreational events, whether it's dance or soccer, and then I do the laundry and I fold the laundry, and then I do the laundry again, and I fold the laundry again, and I do the laundry again, and I fold. What is the point of all this thing that we call life? And so this morning we embark on this 6-week series out of the book of Ecclesiastes. As Solomon nears the end of his life, he reflects back and gives us some wisdom to ponder about our own lives. And this is part 1 of this series entitled The Truth About Fulfillment. And so in the first part of this book in the Bible, Solomon begins to talk about what truly gives us fulfillment in life. It is clear that in our day, many of us try to find fulfillment in so many different ways. And Solomon did the same. And so Solomon writes some powerful words, again, as he's nearing the end of his life. In the latter part of chapter 1 of the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon begins to spill out as to what he thinks really fulfills his heart, what hasn't fulfilled his heart, and what truly can fulfill your heart. He says these words. He says, "Call me the quester. I've been king over Israel and Jerusalem. I looked most carefully into everything. I searched out all that is done on this earth. And let me tell you, he says, there's not much to write home about." He says, God hasn't made it easy for us. He says, I've seen it all, and it's nothing but smoke. Smoke and spitting into the wind, he says. Life's like a corkscrew that can't be straightened out. A minus that won't add up. You ever feel that way? He continues and he says, I've said to myself, I know more and I'm wiser than anyone before me in Jerusalem. I've stockpiled wisdom and knowledge. What I've finally concluded is that so-called human wisdom and knowledge are mindless and witless. Nothing but spitting into the wind, he says. Much learning earns you much trouble. The more you know, the more at times you hurt, he says. I said to myself, okay, maybe I can get fulfilled by experimenting with pleasure, he says. Have a good time in life. He says, but there was nothing to it. Nothing but smoke. What do I think of the fun-filled life, you ask, he says. Insane. Insane. My verdict on the pursuit of happiness, who needs it? With the help of a bottle of wine, he says, and all the wisdom I can muster, I tried my level best to penetrate the absurdity of life. I wanted to get a handle on anything useful we mortals might do during the years we spend on this earth. He sought happiness through pleasures, but he says didn't fill it. He goes on to say, I said no to nothing. I had everything at my disposal. He says, oh, I did great things. I built houses, I planted vineyards, I designed gardens and parks and planted a variety of fruit trees in them. I made pools of water to irrigate the groves of trees. I bought slaves, male and female, who had children, giving me even more slaves. Then I acquired large herds and flocks, larger than any before me in Jerusalem. I piled up the silver. I piled up the gold, loot from kings and kingdoms. I gathered a chorus of singers to entertain me with song, and most exquisite of all the pleasures, voluptuous maidens for my bed. Wow. Yes, this is in the Bible. Oh, how I prospered, he says. I left all my predecessors in Jerusalem far behind, left them behind in the dust. What's more, I kept a clear head through it all. Everything I wanted, I took. I never said no to myself. I gave in to every impulse, held back nothing. I sucked the marrow of pleasure right out of every task. My reward to myself for hard days' work. I deserved it. And then he says, but man, then I took a good look at everything I'd done. Looked at all the sweat and all the hard work. But when I looked, I saw nothing but smoke. Smoke and spitting into the wind. There was nothing to any of it, he said. Nothing. And then I took a hard look at what's smart and what's stupid. And he says, what's left to do after you've been king? That's a hard act to follow. You just do what you can, and that's it. But I did see that it's better to be smart than ignorant. Just as light is better than darkness. Even so, though, the smart ones see where they're going, and the stupid ones grope in the dark, they're all the same in the end. One fate for all, and that's it. We all end the same way. When I realized that my fate's the same as the fool's, I had to ask myself, so why bother being wise? It's all smoke. Nothing but smoke. The smart and the ignorant both disappear out of sight. In a day or two, they're both forgotten. Yes, both the smart and the ignorant die, and that's it. It's over. End of story. He says, man, I dislike life sometimes. As far as I can see it, what happens on earth is bad business. It's smoke and spitting into the wind. He's a little jaded, isn't he? And I hated everything I'd accomplished and accumulated on this earth. I can't take it with me. No, I have to leave it to whoever comes after me. Whether they're worthy or worthless, and who's to tell? They'll take over the earthly results of my intense thinking and all of my hard work. Smoke, nothing but smoke. That's when I called it quits, gave up on anything that could be hoped for on this earth. What's the point of working your fingers to the bone if you had over what you worked for to someone who never lifted a finger for it? Smoke. That's what it is. A bad business from start to finish. So what do you get from a life of hard labor? Pain and grief from dawn to dusk. Never a decent night's rest. Nothing but smoke, he says. The best you can do, he concludes, with your life is have a good time and get the best you can out of life. The way I see it, that's it. Divine fate. Whether we feast or fast, it's up to God. God may give wisdom and knowledge and joy to his favorites, but sinners are assigned a life of hard labor and end up turning their wages over to God's favorites. Nothing but smoke, a spitting into the wind. Solomon's words, inspired, yes, by the Holy Spirit. A man who's sharing his feelings after a life of ups and downs, of wisdom and wealth and affluence and pleasure and materialism. And at the end of the day, he says, what really matters, what is this life all about? Because much of it, from Solomon's perspective, he says, is meaningless. It's smoke. It's like spitting into the wind. Wow. You know, in this text that at times gets unpreached or untaught, unfortunately, there are three common ways that people try to find fulfillment in life. Solomon presents us three ways in which he personally tried to fulfill something in his heart. And one of those common ways that we at times try to bring fulfillment in our life is through intellectualism. smarts. We figure if we can only get more educated and get more intellectual, then that will fulfill my life. And Solomon says it in verses 16 to 18. He says, I said to myself, look, I've increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I've experienced much wisdom and knowledge, he says. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. Now, before you put that next slide up, I want you to ask yourself, what nation in the entire world is seen as the most educated country in the world? There was research just simply done by U.S. Global Investors 2019, and they released this information. What country do you think in the entire world is seen as the most educated country in the world? China, India, Greenland, Finland. Hey, Canada. Canada, according to U.S. Global Investors, Canada tops the list as the most educated country in the world, with 56.27% of adults having earned some kind of higher education. In fact, our own Prime Minister Trudeau has said we need education to enable people to learn, think, and adapt. We, every year as a nation, graduate students with master's degrees, medical degrees, law degrees, PhDs. As a society, we pride ourselves in being smart and getting smarter all the time. Friends, what would Solomon say? There is nothing wrong with higher education. Please hear my heart. I have dedicated my life. I got a bachelor degree, and I'm not saying this, I'm just context here. I have a bachelor of theology. I have a master's of arts in Christian studies. I dedicated myself. I get my kids to understand this on a regular basis. There's nothing wrong with higher education, but we must not think that our intellectualism will bring us lasting sense of fulfillment in our life. And that's my fear as a nation. I fear that if we have bought into this idea, if we could just get smarter and more intellectual, we'll find more fulfillment in our life. Friends, it's not true. Has our culture and society gotten better because of our higher level of intellectualism? No. In many cases, it has decayed even worse. Let me put it this way. It wasn't long ago that 20 of the brightest pilots, the smartest pilots of the world, all of who had exceptionally high IQs and a great deal of aviation experience, they were put into a flight simulator, and they were asked to fly a plane that was in the midst of difficult weather. It was dark. There was a storm, and it was very dark with storm clouds. And they were asked to try in this flight simulator to get the plane through safety without crashing. But there was one hitch. They weren't allowed to use any of the instruments in the flight simulator. They were simply to use their own experience and brain power and IQ to keep this plane flying instead of crashing. Do you know what the average was in terms of length before those planes crashed in that flight simulator? How long they lasted in the air without their instruments? 178 seconds. The average that they were able to keep that plane in the air was 178 seconds before they crashed. What's the point? The point is the pilot needs the instruments. As smart as they are, as high as their IQs are, as much as they had tons of experience, they needed those tools to help them navigate through the tough weather. Friends, We need the word of the Lord in our life and in our culture, because without the word of the Lord, which is the instrument that helps guide us to stay afloat, without the word of the Lord, and with only our dependency on our own experience, on our own intellect, and our own IQ levels, we will crash the plane every single time. And that's my fear. That as a nation, yes, we're getting more intellectual. But friends, intellectualism will never equal fulfillment. It will never equal a safe landing in our life. And so I ask you, I implore you to be men and women of the Word of God. Do not just depend on your intellectualism, your education, your IQ, or even your experience in life. Because, friends, you need the wisdom of God in your life. And life and society is only getting more complex. If we deter ourselves away from the Word of God, we're in a heap of trouble. And not only are we, but our kids and our families are in trouble without the word of the Lord. Friend, the word of the Lord should not just be a voice in our life, it should be the voice in our lives. But I wonder if the preacher and his voice, who proclaims the word of the Lord, has become a voice amongst many voices. And we take what we like and we don't take what we don't like. You need the instrument. You need the word of the Lord. Intellectualism will not bring fulfillment in life. Solomon warns us about relying too much on our intelligence. Here's the wisest man on the planet. He says, don't rely on that thing called human wisdom. He would say, don't use it to find your fulfillment. Don't place your identity there, because if you do, at some point you will be bitterly disappointed. He is trying to tell us, if we take the good gift of our minds and make its use our ultimate goal, in the end, we'll only find frustration because it's not God. We need to be reminded of the words of the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 25. He says, for the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. He goes on in 2 Corinthians, he says, when I came to you, I did not come with eloquence or human wisdom as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God. No. He goes on to say, for I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness with great fear and trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. And this is important, friend. Do not get sidetracked by preachers who perhaps sound very smart and intellectual. And they bring the Greek and the Hebrew, and all that is beautiful. And usually in my message, there's about 10 other pages of study. And only 2 or 3 pages of what I actually share. And so the study of the preacher is really important, and understanding its context and its Greek and its Hebrew. But friend, preachers and teachers should not just try to be flexing their muscles so that you say, wow, they're smart. But rather, our ministry should be marked by the power of the Holy Spirit, a demonstration of God's power in and through our lives. And so Paul is saying, don't get caught up with intellectualism and make that your goal. Make God your goal. God can fulfill your heart. Intellectualism pales in comparison. Another common avenue that people search for fulfillment in their life is this thing we call hedonism. Hedonism is this life of pleasure seeking and experiencing all the pleasures and never putting any boundaries around ourselves. We just want to enjoy everything. We want to, be pleased. The ultimate goal is to feel pleasure without any boundaries in our life. Well, Solomon tried that, didn't he? In chapter 2, 1-3, he says these words, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. He says, laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of our lives. And then in verse 8 and 10, he goes on to say, I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart not any pleasures. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Solomon lived a life of pleasure seeking, in many ways of hedonism. We know this because in 1 Kings 11, it talks a little bit about Solomon, that Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. I'm not even going to say anything about that. That just says enough. But let's face it. We live in a culture that is consumed with the search of pleasure. In many ways, many have abandoned even their moral compass for the pleasures of this world. In fact, we live in a sex-crazed world. Let's talk a little bit about that, seeing that Solomon had his challenges when it came to his sexuality. If we are seen as putting any limits on our sexuality, we're looked upon as ignorant, intolerant, and insensitive. I came across a really disturbing article. It's entitled, We're a Nation of Porn Addicts. In just 1 year, in 2016, now listen to this, the people of America dedicated well over 4.5 billion hours to watching porn on just one porn site. Did you hear that? In 1 year, in 2016, Americans spent 4.5 billion hours watching porn, and that's just one website. The site had over 90 billion video views and 44,000 visitors every minute of the day. The porn industry is worth $97 billion, which is about 100 times higher than $750 million that it was worth just 20 years ago. Today, porn grosses more in a year than all of Hollywood. It also brings in more money, and on this Super Bowl Sunday, listen to this, it also brings in more money than the NFL, NBA, and Major League Baseball combined. We've got a problem. And we would be naive to think that it's only in somebody else's life and only in somebody else's house. Hedonism has taken the day. Pleasure seeking has taken the day. This sense that I will be fulfilled. Forget delayed gratification. I want it now. I want to feel good now. Susie Scott, former Playboy mate, said this. She had an encounter with the Lord, and she came to faith and turned her life around. But upon her reflection of her life as in the Playboy mansion, she said these words. When you go down that road, sex becomes less and less satisfying and more perverse, and then finally becomes utterly worthless. it doesn't mean anything to anyone anymore. And it's true. You see, the truth is, the pursuit of sexual fulfillment kills the development of intimate human relationships. The truth is, hedonism, a life of pleasure, will never bring lasting fulfillment into your life. And you can go from Instagram account to an Instagram account just seeing images of what pleasure looks like. And there's this message that goes, this is the life. Friend, that life is filled with emptiness, death, and heartache. Don't buy into the idea that if I could just have more pleasure, I'll be more fulfilled. The third common way that people try to find fulfillment in their life is materialism. Solomon writes in such an eloquent way. He says, I undertook great projects, he says. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and more flocks than anyone in all of Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delight of a man's heart. Material. He built stuff. He had a lot of stuff. Nobody compared with him. In fact, one historian says that he built 3 pools near Bethlehem, and they're said to have been constructed by him. And they dammed the Urdus Valley, and each of the first 2 can overflow into the pool below it. And it's claimed that altogether these pools held over 40 million gallons of water. You know those fountains in front of an Italian's house? I still don't understand why we do that. Fountains and lion heads and... I could say that because I'm Italian, right? This man got it done, and he got it done right. Houses, pools, vineyards. But it didn't bring fulfillment. Didn't bring fulfillment. I wonder how we're doing with accumulating stuff. How are you doing with accumulating stuff? Because recently, I came across an article that says we are all accumulating mountains of things. In 2017, Americans spent $240 billion, twice as much as they spent in 2002, on goods like jewelry, watches, books, luggage, telephones, and related communication equipment. Spending on personal care products also have doubled over that same time period. We are all accumulating mountains of things, said Mark Cohen, the director of retail studies at Columbia University's Graduate School of Business. At the same time, we are amassing all this stuff. We are also taking up a whole lot more space because of all the stuff. Last year, the average size of a single-family house in America was just over 2,400 square feet. 23% increase in size from 2 decades ago. Of course, where are we going to put all our stuff? On top of that, do you know what one of the number one increasing businesses that's out there? If you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to start something, storage units. There are around 52,000 such facilities nationally. 2 decades ago, there was only half of that amount. Do you know the calls that I get? We own a property in 1100 Canadian Place. You ever heard of that? And I've had multiple calls from business people saying, hey, do you want to sell that property? And I say, why? What do you want to do on it? Storage units. We'll pay you top dollar because we need more storage because everybody's got a lot of stuff. Is this what your garage looks like? Are you a hoarder? If you're married here and your spouse is always bringing more stuff, going to auctions, bringing stuff. You know, it's interesting that between 1970 and 2006, the average income in the States, when adjusted for inflation, went up 18%. So our income has increased over time, even as Canadians. And during the same time period, we've acquired, because we've had more income, guess what? More stuff. So during the same period of greater income, the following has also occurred. Now, don't put it up yet. You'd think we'd be happier, right? You'd think we'd be more fulfilled because, man, I got more stuff. But this is what's been happening with the higher income and the more stuff. The divorce rate has tripled. Teen suicide has tripled. We have seen more mental health challenges than ever before in our day. Why? I don't understand. We got more money. We've got more stuff. We should be happier, shouldn't we? Solomon says, I've got the fountains. I've got the gallons and gallons of water that flow from fountain to pool. I've got the houses. I've got the vineyards. I've got the properties. I've got it all. I've got the other country's loot. I've got it all. But it's meaningless. You know why? Because at the end of the day, we all die. And I can't take it with me. And somebody else will get it, and they didn't pick up one finger to earn all that stuff. You know what? I think the next generation is getting stressed about how we're going to deal with all of mom's and dad's stuff. We envision ourselves getting this big, those big garbage bins. Bring it into the driveway. Stuff doesn't bring fulfillment. Materialism doesn't bring fulfillment. Friends, we got to get this, because we all struggle with it. We're all tempted to try to find our fulfillment in that latest gadget, that latest toy. So what's the point? What's the answer? Joel, you've told me hedonism doesn't do it, intellectual doesn't do it, materialism doesn't do it. Then how can I live a fulfilling life? The answer to finding true fulfillment in life is this. Ecclesiastes 2:24-26. Solomon says this: a person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too, I see, is from the hand of God. There's a piece here about contentment, about working to the glory of God and enjoying with what the Lord has given to us. For without him, he says, who can eat or find enjoyment? We can't. Without God, we'll never find true enjoyment in our life. To the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, isn't it? A chasing after the wind. True lasting fulfillment comes when God is at the center of our lives. That is the answer. You want to know how to find a fulfilling life? Keep Christ at the center of your life. Without God, there's no enjoyment of the good things of life, because he's the one who gives the happiness. He wants you to enjoy those gifts. He wants you to enjoy your life. He wants you to be fulfilled with your hard-earned resources. But please don't dethrone him and make those things the answer to your life. They're not. It's the one who gave them. It's the one who made you. He's the one who gave you the breath in your lungs. May we not dethrone the one, the master of our lives. Our money is not our own, it's his. Our resources are not our own, it's his. Our gifts are not our own, it's his. Lord, may I live a life that's completely surrendered to you, a life that is completely living for you. Not my smarts, not my pleasure seeking, not my material possessions, but Lord, may I strive to live my life for you, that I would honor you with my life every step of the way. Unless Jesus is at the center of our lives, more money or more education or more sex will never satisfy you. Jesus said these words, "Seek first his kingdom, his rule and reign, and his righteousness, and all these other things will be given to you as well." Worship team, can you come on up? Seek first his kingdom first. Not intellectualism, not materialism, not pleasures, but him. I'm also reminded as we conclude this morning of the words of the Apostle Paul in 1 Timothy 6. Listen to the word of the Lord. Remember, we need the word of the Lord to direct our lives. Listen to the words of the Apostle Paul. 1 Timothy 6, he says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that." Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many, many griefs. But you, woman, man of God, flee from all this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, gentleness. Fight the good fight of the faith. Take hold of the eternal life to which you were called when you made your good confession in the presence of many witnesses. The word of the Lord, your compass, your instrument. Would you stand with us? All over this world, you can say, "Lord, my life is yours. Forgive me if I've tried to find fulfillment in all these other things. Right now, Lord, I want to taste and be satisfied by you.